Is it recording? Yes, it is. Okay, good morning to Ali and Huda. Good afternoon, Jennifer. So we are in week 10, and for this week, we're supposed to look at your seminar. You all have prepared your slides. So I have shown you the rubric last week of what I will be evaluating you on. Please use your classmates for participation marks. Try to engage with them. Make sure there is sufficient discussion in your presentation. There's an introduction, a middle, and an end. Okay, so who would like to go first?
Can Ali start, please?
Yes, go ahead, Ali. Go ahead.
Yes, Doctor. Just I want to share my screen.
All right.
It's clear, Doctor, now, my slides now?
It's coming up. Yes.
Okay. So, hello, Doctor. Hello, everyone. Today, I'm going to present my assignment 2, that is about the post-colonial Malay supremacy in KS Maniums in a far country. As background of the novel, K.S. Manium announced in 2006 his works basically include the thematic sense of belonging by which he strived to describe the sense of attachment to the land or gaining a sense of identity from a national perspective. In a far country recounts the story of Rajan, the protagonist, achieves great professional progress, negotiates land transactions and construct ventures for real estate. He is far from the stereotypes in Malaysia surrounding Indians. His friends, Chinese Malaysian, who is Letian, who is not an entrepreneur, he is not engaged to profit. He is very autonomous, but he would like to rebuild a China that is impossible to exist with a flute, garments, and Chinese furniture. He isolates himself if he is far from cliches, more about Chinese, and can no longer regulate his life. As seen through the perspective of a Malaysian, Manium offers manifestation of the social conditions of the country, although the peculiarities of problems and questions are more serious in the later scenario. Zulkifli is the Malay character Rajan encounters. Zulkifli considers himself to have some influence over Rajan as a member of the powerful Malay community. He defines and prescribes what he feels is needed of minority that attempts to belong to the nation, which implies giving up all past ties, especially to the motherland, and moving to the new world emotionally and physically. As background of the study, and according to Jeffrey Hayes in his article that is British in Malaysia, in the British colonial era, the urgent need to increase manpower due to the importance of rubber industry, and the British didn't consider Malays are reliable workers. The alternative was important plantation labor, mostly Tamil speakers from South India, from India. A wave of migrant labor from southern China was also drawn to the mines, mills, and also docks. Cities such as Singapore, Penang, and Apua were soon mainly Chinese, as were Kuala Lumpur, established in 1857 as a tin mining hub. Perak and Selangor, the largest tin mining states, had Chinese populations by 1891 when Malay's first survey was taken. Then, unlike the Chinese community, the Indians were less productive as they came mostly as underpaid people to work in the rubber plantations and had little of the business advantages the Chinese had. As they were split between Hindus and Muslims and along language and class divisions, they were also a less unified unit. Then, even during early 20th century, an Indian business and technical class arose, but in rural neighborhoods, in the rubber growing regions, the majority of Indians stayed poor and uneducated. Then in 1938, in Kuala Lumpur, Young Malays Union or KMM was a first nationalist revolutionary party, calling for the unity of all Malays and calling for the completely separate motive of Malays from the Indians and Chinese. Banji Malayo Raya, which called for the union of British Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, was a particular idol kept by the KMM. So in this presentation, I will shed the light on the Malay supremacy in the period of post-colonization and Malay's rejection to non-Malay by analyzing KS maniums in a far country. So in my research here, I have three objectives. The first object that is to explore how the author illustrates Malay supremacy in the novel. And also we have to examine the diaspora characters suffer from the Malay supremacy. And the third object that is to highlight the characters' reactions to Malay supremacy. As for conceptual framework, Malay supremacy by Kitnoan Malayo is the appreciation for anything relevant to the Malay race, such as political power, language, cultural identity, and traditions, as well as home. In the same manner, on the basis of the concept of sovereignty, the powerful Diwan Bahasa dan Pustaka, that is Institute for Language and Literature, describes it as the right to rule or govern a nation, state, and also district. It means also the Malays are Malays' earliest or indigenous community and the only people who can assert Malaya as their only and only region. This grounds on the Malays in line with national or nationwide practice certain inherent rights over the forms and responsibilities of citizenship that can be placed on people of non-indigenous descent. The party advocated for Malay when UMNO, that is the United Malays National Organization, was first set up in 1946. Nationalism and the Sultan's security. UMNO was founded after the defeated plan of the Malayan Union and what was essential at the time. UMNO leaders were Malay political preeminence and the Sultan's supremacy. They were concerned about reducing the British political influence of the society of Malays and the Sultans, especially through the British strategy to enable Chinese and Indians introduced by the British ought to be equal citizens for financial reasons. Wide parts of the theory of justly right of territory was seen by the Malaysian society in the Malayan Union citizenship agreement is much too generous. So for Malay supremacy and as for rejection, rejection refers to Malay's rejection to non-Malay community in Malaya and considering Malaya for Malays. As for post-colonial nationalism, the Malay post-colonial nationalism made a gap between who are Malay and who are not. Consequently, the unsubtle relationship existed between Malay ethnic and other ethnics. The situation resulted in poverty and marginalization and aggravated the emotional inferiority. And for the identity crisis of the immigrants manifests when they are unable to fit and adapt to the ways of the new or adopted homeland. Failure to reintegrate and acculturate causes a sense of cultural displacement and alienation among immigrants. As for nationalism and post-colonial nationalism, for nationalism, national identity, as advocated by Finlayson 2014, one of the factors shaping nationalism, the term should be expanded to embrace the sovereignty of the folks as its main and fundamental objective. Nationalism is an intellectual movement on behalf of a community considered by some of its participants to constitute a real or future country, to gain and preserve sovereignty, solidarity, and also identity. Theorist argues that the meaning of nationalism is to be free.
Hello? Ali?
I think the net is locked. I'll call him and see, doctor. Doctor, he tried to come back. Okay.
Hello, Doctor.
Ali.
I'm sorry, Doctor, about that.
It's all right. Don't worry about it. Do you want to continue?
Yes, just let me share
Okay.
again. It's clear, Dr. now?
It's coming up. Yeah.
The last slide I was here, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So again, I'm sorry about that, everyone. The last slide was I end that nationalism and post-colonial nationalism. For nationalism, national identity as advocated by Finlayson 2014, one of the factors shaping nationalism, the term should be expanded to embrace the sovereignty of the folks as it is main and fundamental objective. Nationalism is an intellectual movement on behalf of a community considered by some of its participants to constitute a real or future country, to gain and preserve sovereignty, solidarity, and identity. Theorists argues that the meaning of nationalism is to be free from foreign influence, that is mean self-determination. Each nation should rule itself and that a country is a normal and ideal basis for politics and that land is the only legitimate tool for political power or state sovereignty. For post-colonial nationalism, the Indian immigrants who traveled to Malaysia hoped to find new blooming life. However, the Indian community was deliberately imposed by colonial power within a small and limited socio-economic dimensions plantation that prohibited them from thriving. The situation resulted in poverty and marginalization and aggravated at the emotional inferiority, feeling of powerlessness and mistrust of the society that are already rooted in Indians' centuries of caste dominance. The Malay post-colonial nationalism made a gap between who are Malay and who are not. Consequently, the unsettled relationship existed between Malay, ethnic, and other ethnics. As for identity crisis, as I mentioned here, the immigrants always discovers that the lost or the host land is foreign to his or her identity, and that the immigrant simply feels unhomely as a result more often than not. Homi Papa in 1992 makes a distinction between homelessness and unhomeliness. He states that after being unhomed, immigrants are converted into psychological refugees. It involves with the crisis of cultural identity. The situation of inhomelessness can also be described as the ability of a house on a foreign soil to act as an acceptable replacement for the native land of a person, due in part to the relations between the individual and the former homeland. They struggle to create a solid identity, and because of their inability to obtain the privilege to own the land on which they have lived, they do not belong to the homeland or to the foreign land. So here in the analysis of the text, and for the post-colonial nationalism, as it mentioned previously, the post-colonial nationalism rejected the existence non-Malay ethnics in Malaysia. It was a movement to esteem the unity of Malay people. In his journey to discover his identity, Rajan, the protagonist of Millenniums in a far country who inherited Indians' origins, he finds out that he is lost in a foreign. Raza Mazami, Rajan's Malay colleague in the company, he consequently reminds Rajan of his Indian identity, and Malaysia is not his homeland, as a metaphor of rootlessness. Raza Mazami tells Rajan that since your birth you are naked, and when your mother started to rob you, she wrapped you in the clothes of our culture. The Tiger Land is repeatedly mentioned in the novel by another Malay character whose name is Zulkifli. Zulkifli represents the guardian of Malay heritage from foreigner. He recounts the story of his son, Matt, who became insane when he traveled to Kuala Lumpur. Zulkifli believes the construction of skyscrapers and deforestation is a process to kill the tiger, which represents Malaya land. As for Malayan tiger, the Malayan tiger represents the national symbol to Malays. It denotes to national pride, strength, and symbol of culture. Malay tiger, which represents the icon of strength on the verge of extinction due to the document that has been recorded in the last 60 years. The loss of forest for agriculture and development, coupled with active persecution with bounty, before the tiger became protected species in 1976, conserved a few thousand tigers. Rajan works in a company of construction plans to destroy some historical monuments to expand. Zulkifli accuses Rajan that he and other foreign entrepreneurs are the reason behind decreasing the area of forest, which aims, as Zulkifli thinks, aims to affect negatively on the Malay identity or the death of the tiger. As for rejection, and as I mentioned here for Zulkifli, Zulkifli is in a clear reference to Rajan that Indians affiliated to British colony, and since they came to the operation of destroying the tiger, which represents the oldest symbol of Malay land, started with their ideas and energies. The disagreement of Malay people with a descendant of Indian immigrants is noticeable in the novel. When Zulkifli takes Rajan in an adventure to find the tiger in the forest, Rajan discovers that Zulkifli meant by tiger is a symbol of Malay root to their land. Then Zulkifli informs Rajan that you cannot see the tiger because you don't have ancestors here. The theme of lose is dominant in atmosphere of the novel, whereby the characters always in internal struggle. Rajan reached the level of lose to deny his Indian genes. I have inherited nothing. Siva Syrian is another character whose root is Indian. He spends his life in a journey seeking his identity. He writes a book about the scenes that he witnesses and gives the book to Rajan. What Sivasurian finds out through his journey that I don't have a history, no past, no desire to give a value to life. For us in homiliness, Sivasurian often discusses the basic sense and relationship between land and identity. He tells Rajan, I'm not myself, you are not yourself. We still ride on the path that we want for ourselves, but not the one that we have decided. Therefore, we still go back here to figure out where we got trapped. Li Xin, the man of Chinese descent, also suffered from his enrooted existence, became paranoid with the feeling of losing identity and the heritage of ancestors. He commenced a suicide after unsuccessful attempts to build his Chinese realm on foreign land. He tries to be surrounded by Chinese antiques and memories all the time. Rajan achieves a study about Li Xin's personality. He notes that there is a gradual alteration in his behavior. Li Xin starts being absent in his work. Then he isolates himself in his room, which Rajan describes it. The sight of Li Xin's room and thus shows proud memories, and once again I found myself resisting the siren call of the past. Then, as for Li Xin starts asking his fiancée to wear traditional Chinese customs, and the message from her to Rajan explains that he was trying to be Chinese in a foreign country. His fiancée says there was no China, as of old, for the culture to grow. So he took it into his head to transplant that culture here. Finally, Sivasurian denotes in his diary the relationship between the identity and dignity. He outlines the difficulties that Indian immigrants face in Malaysia. He witnessed Indian people who were starving in Port Town, people who hoped to find their redemption in a foreign land. They lost their dignity and cursed the poverty. They want to go back to their homeland who takes care of them. Let us go home. Let us go home. Our mother there will feed us, clothe us, give back our dignity. Consequently, Sivasurian points out that many immigrants lost their dignity when they traveled to another country. They cannot cope with the new land, and the new land didn't impress them. The last but not the least, and as for conclusion, the nationalism movement strives to post the unity of the original ethic of the land and post-colonial nationalism, opposites to the consequences of the colonization. Thus, after the withdrawing of British colonization from Malaysia, a generation of Indian and Chinese who were born in Malaysia, they stayed in it as a local. However, KS Maniam focused on the instability in the relationship between Malay and non-Malay. This tension paves the way to the notion of identity and land crisis, as Homi Bhabha describes in Homt. The non-Malay ethics try to adapt with this situation. They boast their own community and celebrate their own festivals in the foreign land. Each main character in Maniums in a far country represents one of these two concepts, either Malay nationalist or from non-Malay descendant from foreign immigrants. The novel considerably depicts the internal struggle of those non-Malay ethnics. That was the end of my presentation for today. Thank you for listening, and that is the work cited. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Ali. Okay, first of all, I think you show a lot of reading. You've read quite broadly. You've covered a lot of different articles, historical, sociological, as well as literary articles. I feel that the seminar lacks focus. Why I say that is because you introduce a lot of concepts, nationalism, post-colonial nationalism, unhomeliness. You talk about Malay supremacy, you talk about identity crisis, especially amongst the migrant communities. You talk about themes of loss, right? So there's a lot of different, and you talk about the spirit of the land, how the tiger is the spirit of the land. So there's lots of different ideas and issues and concepts that are being weaved together in the seminar. And sometimes the connections are obvious and strong, and sometimes the connections missing. If I could ask you to define in your own words now, don't look at the slides, in your own words, after presenting all that, what is the purpose of this presentation? What was it that you were trying to achieve in doing this presentation on Maniams in a Far Country? What is it that you really want to say about this novel?
That is very good question, Doctor. As long as my presentation focus on the supremacy that represented by the Malay in Malaysia, or the Malay community in general, and how they treat with the Chinese and Indians community.
You see, you say that's your thesis, but your analysis and the examples, the evidence from the text tends to focus more on the theme of lost, the issue of identity crisis, the issue of unhomeliness amongst the migrants. So I feel like there's a kind of a mismatch between what you say your theme is and what you actually do in your analysis. You know, I'm inclined to go with whatever my analysis is, I will make that into a thesis statement, meaning that if this is what I think I want to talk about in my analysis, and if I keep looking at the text, and these are the issues that I keep having to these are the issues that I identify and I can see and I can analyze, I would make that my thesis statement. So, for instance, I would have focused on your seminar, I would have focused on the theme of lost. And my questions, the questions that I would ask, the research questions that I would ask regarding the theme of lost in Maniam's In a Far Country would be, number one, what type of loss is being described in this novel? Is loss a bad thing? Can loss, the theme of loss, can loss be used to develop something in the character? Because when we think of the word loss, it, you know, it seems more negative, right? But when Siva Surya says, you know, about loss, when Li Xin, right, says, he talks about this.
Victor, you hear me?
Yes.
I just will be on by my phone because my computer is about to switch off because it has no power.
You can stop sharing first. Stop sharing.
Okay,
Would
okay.
that help?
Yes. Okay.
Would that help?
Yes.
Your battery is very low. That's why.
Is that stopping now?
Not yet. Ali, did you just stop?
Yes, Doctor, I'm trying.
Okay. So I will give you my comments. After this, I will send you all my comments.
Okay.
But I feel like your thesis statement and your analysis is not matching. And I feel like you would have done better if you focus more on what it is that you were analyzing and not what you think you want to say, what you think you want to do. What is it that you're analyzing tends to be the way to develop your thesis statement. Okay, so I will send you my comments. And also, Rasma Sami, is that the right name? That's not a Malay character, that's an Indian character. Zulkifli is the only Malay character, the only prominent Malay character in the novel. I think it's Ramasamy, right? I could be wrong. You check the spelling. Ramasamy is an Indian character. So if you look at your analysis, you know, this notion of Malay supremacy is not prominent in your analysis. The excerpts that you have identified from the novel does not illustrate the issue of Malay supremacy as strongly as you identify the issue of lost, right? Sense of loss. So I think you would have done better if you had focused on that theme. But all the same, good effort. You know, the fact that it's a challenging novel, and you're reading it, you know, based on all these other references that you have for yourself, without any kind of personal guidance. I think you did a brilliant job trying to crack a very difficult, a very challenging novel, filled with stream of consciousness, and the narrative is not linear, goes back and forth, into Rajan's mind, and then into the past and back again into the present. So well done. Okay, who wants to go next?
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Who
I will
wants-
try, sorry, I will try to correct these ideas that you give me right now.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Work on it. Work on improving your next presentation. Work on improving
Okay.
the connection between thesis statement and the analysis. Okay.
Doctor, inshallah.
Who would like to go next?
I'll go next, Doctor.
Ken?
Yeah, okay. Whoa, okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, I will just start. Okay, hello everybody. For today's seminar, I'll be discussing about a collection of short story by a Malaysian female author, Shirley Cow's Ripples and Other Stories. Just a little recap on the background of the author and her book. Shirley Cow is a Malaysian writer. She was born in 1968. Secondary boarding school in Kulim, Kedah, A-levels in Johor, degree in chemical engineering, UK. So she has written a few books, which is quite prominent. The Sum of Our Follies, Ripples and Other Stories, which I'll be focusing. News from Home, Body, Clutch Break, Accelerated and Other Stories, and Novelis de Malaysis. And on this, about this short story, am I still presenting, Doctor? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, the screen went blank. Oh, okay, sorry. So the book that I will be looking at is Ripples and Other Stories. It was again. Nominated for the Commonwealth Writer Prize in the First Book category and shortlisted for the 2009 Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award. Released in Malaysia under Silverfish Books, and illustrates how ethnic communities in Malaysia have interpreted, interpolated, and reworked the concept of multiculturalism and cultural nationalism by Hamid 2012. So here comes my question for the day. Why did I choose her book and her short stories instead of a novel or any other Malaysian author? Well, because it's her author-defined sociality in constructing male representation. So, in other words, how men are portrayed by Shirley Cow in her short stories. Particularly men's role in a society, such as being a father, a husband, a son, or as an individual, a man in their community. So before I go to the next slide and all, after I presented my seminar, it would be nice that if you guys can tell me if you have experienced it, like what I'm about to discuss, from how you see, is it the same as how Shirley Cow's author defined sociality? Is it same as what you have experienced, like among the men around you? So, coming back to the definition that will be relevant for my discussion would be, first of all, gender role. As I've mentioned before, by Greenglass, gender role is used in sociology and psychology to refer to the pre-described behaviors, attitudes, and characteristics associated with one gender status, as a female or a male. Attributes associated with gender are the result of learning per cultural standards or prescriptions. Next, male or men studies. The core essence in male study is to inspire men to work together with women in what is called as gender equity, rather than defending themselves against misandry that feminism aims at highlighting. So Cornell's 1995 definition of supporting men, stay-at-home fathers, are no longer seen as powerless. Their supportive domestic roles is considered important in maintaining the sanity of their spouse and harmony within the household. And last but not least, masculinity. So what is masculinity? Again, by Cornell 2005. It's said to rest logically on the dichotomization of biological, sex versus gender, culture, and thus marginalize or naturalize the body. Next, masculinity is not a fixed entity embedded in the body or personality traits of individual. Again, masculinities are configuration of practice that are accomplished in social action and therefore can differ according to the gender relation in a particular social setting. Lastly, consider how an idealized definition of masculinity is constituted in social process, but also in various ways distorted the every realities of social practice. So all these definitions are really related to the short stories that I'll be looking to, and there will be 3 short stories from Ripple. So again, the first story that I'll be looking at is titled Ripples, and I'll be showcasing excerpts that I have underlined and bold, which will be significant to my discussion of men are being shown in a different light by the author. And for this particular story, Ripples follows a man and his role as a father, husband, son, and as an individual. So, first story, Ripples. As you can see, it's in green, and these are the excerpts. So, I'll read out a few. So, what was mentioned in the short story is first paragraph, in the absence course of our life, we are tested, or so my fathers have led me to believe, that the sum of my manhood and my measure of worth come from weathering these tests of courage, of perseverance, of fidelity, of justice, of faith, and so on and so forth. Next, he as a father worked at 3 jobs to feed 6 mouths. So he was the breadwinner of his family, and he endured this hardship, and he rebuilt himself and his home when he actually went bankrupt. And I even underlined stored up my resilience. So he was taking up his job and his role seriously as a father and husband to his family. And again, he was tested to the limits of his spirit and survived. And then when his wife was sick, he mentioned, I prevailed and passed the test of temptation. And then after his wife passed away, I grieved and shouldered on for the children. And then the funny thing is, after mentioning all these things, he said, my father's legacy of the belief in a bank of virtue. It's so like he doesn't really agree with it. And then again, last slide for this, we sat around in a hollow house talking about alignments to those people we knew, our disappointment with our children. This is the part where he was talking to his friend. And the next one is, I have allowed myself to think alternative ways of going about this business of living, that I may have wasted more than half a lifetime collecting when I should have learned the skill of catching. Okay, and next is, woven into me the belief of passing tests of character and collecting virtue was the conviction that pursuit of levity belonged in the domain of women and daughters, that the luxury of surrender and the comfort of tears and shared pain, if I do allow it. So instead of collecting, he said the art of catching in the art of trapping the smallest temporary happiness. And then in this pursuit of the skill of catching, I would have been less of a man in my father's eyes, but perhaps more of a father, a husband and a friend. But then my father would have called it ideal pursuits and unworthy search of pleasure. So after looking at 2 slides on this, it says that going back to the literature review that I could relate to this story is that in Horcrux 1994, it says that patriarchal masculinity cripples men. As you can see as how this character struggles with it, and he defines that manhood as we know it in our society requires such a self-destructive identity, a deeply misogynistic self-denial, a shrinking of the self, a turning away from the whole areas of life, that the man who obeys the demand of masculinity has become only half human. So the second slide that you can see, he mentions that if he could have done this, if he had done that, if he was allowed to, he could be a better person. So we as the readers can feel the struggle of the protagonist as he willfully and undoubtedly follow his father's footsteps, which in the end he hoped he didn't. And I would like to say that if the society surrounding him could have allowed it, he would perhaps wanted to embrace another kind of way of being a man, perhaps a more in a sense, more feminine side, I would say. So he could be a father to shower his love to his children without being seen as weak, to love his wife without being seen as vulnerable or obeying to his wife, and more compassionate and gentle towards his friend that he can share and talk secrets to or stuff like that. And although that the main characters learned this virtue from his father, he did manage to survive the hardships or struggles that he went through. In another way, he has lost himself. Probably, I feel that just like a kite, aimlessly and merely relying on the wind, flying around, surviving this world. But this is not uncommon, as quoted by Mary Ignan, 1985. She describes this kind of pattern in her own family. It was only after my mother died that I began to realize how much they have functioned as a symbolic hope, of which my mother was the emotional, affectionate, and the one who cared. So, being a man in this story, he has forgo the emotional part. And I'll proceed to the second story, which is Waiting for Gorjin. Here, the main character is shown in a different side of being a husband and an individual. Okay, so green. The excerpt is, there is a woman back in KL. Her name is Gorjin Kao. You must make sure she dies. So the readers might be shocked when you see this first sentence. He might seem as showcasing domestic violence, but hold up. It says that make sure you get a really sharp knife and hold her for a while after you finish. See, the underlying part, do not let her fall. She got a bad knee and I don't want her to be alone. And again, her last breath will bring her to a forkroad at the edge of this place. And this man, just what the character's name, will be waiting for her. And the wait will be soon. And then because she actually was killed, Gorjin was killed and came to the place. And then he said, the date of the birth match, no, it couldn't be. She was supposed to meet him here halfway. And he had planned all this so that they could travel together on the ride to the conveyor after that. Okay, bear me. Jaswal fretted as he left his station, not realizing that he could never return to it again. And then the bold one, how on earth or in heaven am I going to find you? I mean, the Gorjin, if you pass through the gates without me. He looked about in rising panic. Desperation made him jump from one line to another next, but he could not find her. And relief loaded him, followed by a well-remembered expiration. Why didn't you just take the left fork like I told you to? I was waiting there. I was there waiting for you. You could have just seen me easily without all these people. Okay, so, and last one for this story. I'm sorry I was not there with you to see the kids through the school and help you with the illness. And then she replied, don't be, you have waited a long time. 32 years could not have been easy. And then he replied, compared to your cancer, it was nothing. Just what? The main character kept secret his plan of sending messages to Gorjin through the second life. They kept me going, this message, Gorjin said. And then finally, Gorjin said, yes, my work is done. And just what said, so is mine, let's go. And both of them, like said, step onto the conveyor, which forked to the right with Gorjin. So, backstory for this story is actually just what has actually passed away, and he is at the afterlife. He is stationed at the afterlife. He has not passed on. He didn't want to reborn because he was waiting for his wife. And then, as the second excerpt of this slide say, he kept his plan of sending messages to Gorjin through the second life. It means that although he died, he still cared for his wife. So just what literally showed his love towards his life, that even after death, he is still loving her, and which coined his marriage vow to his wife seriously, meaning till death do us apart. And usually for me, I would highlight this story is because I am rarely exposed to male characters being loving and expressive to their wife. To lovers, perhaps, because if the storyline it falls under the category of adultery, then it is, but the gentleness and consideration is not really shown much to their female counterparts. So Shiri Kao actually wrote this, and which is intriguing as you can see from the excerpt, as well as Horcroft's. He noted in his 1994 article that both eloquent and a precise description of the reciprocal symbiosis with many marriage become. Each partner lives through the other in a certain area of life. We might say that in our culture there is a visible patriarchy, the economic and social dominance of men over women, and an invisible matriarchy, the emotional dominance of women over men, which further elaborates by Cornell 2005 that masculinities are configuration of practice that are constructed, unfold, and change through time. So, in other words, given a chance and space, men could act and be the way they want to be, and sometimes perhaps able to express the emotion and that was rarely shown as was received by their wife. So, in our current society, especially in the Malaysian literature context and the Malaysian society of the generation before me, I would say, men expressing their emotional side and love towards their wife perhaps were not encouraged and even more so frowned upon. So by this author writing it is a very nice perspective. So the direction back to the action done by the character, Jaswat, of this particular short story, he could be coined as a romantic person, given as a compliment, but if it was a negative comment, he will be a weakling, always in attempt to please his wife, that his wife might be a tiger wife instead. So the symbiotic relationship between man, woman, and Shirley calls, and she manages to portray some men in society as in Malaysia during this era were able to pass off by expressing his emotion without being outcast from the male gender community. So last short story is Know My Name, and he in this story, the male character, the protagonist, is in the role of being a son and again as an individual. So let me go through the slide with you. Until I was 3, the first paragraph, my grandmother always said I was born lucky. I was to bring luck to the whole family. But then she died before I made that come true. And the second one, my grandmother was the one who named me. My name means fortune and success, but my mother now calls me a lump of tapioca. She tells neighbors that she would have been better off birthing a cut of pork. And then this is him going up. I have spent many hours after school under the girls' work table playing my imaginary games. When I was 8, I was banned from the workshop because one of the girls Ding Ding told my mother that I've touched her legs. The night before, I had watched Tarzan, and he said I saw nothing wrong in sliding my hands over them a little bit. My hands were whipped until I could not bend my fingers. Okay. Next, continue. After he was whipped, he said that night I tried to be quiet, but the quieter I was, the more I was hit. When I came out from the bathroom, I was beaten again for wasting water, but I had run out of tears. What he did was, with sugar, he ate sugar. So with sugar melting in my mouth, the familiar smell of glue filling my head, and retrieving the memories of girls' voices flowing over the table, I came close to being happy. And then again, Colonel G, he lifted my shirt and looked at the back before I could stop him. Maybe he saw the bruises from last week or the cane marks from last night. And then Colonel G has a box of toys under his bed. I look at them a lot, but I don't touch them. If I do, he might own me too, like the boys. Okay. Our house became very busy during the last school holidays. I tried to help, but I was called useless. I couldn't get the covers on the cans quick enough. And then the last paragraph, after the last time I went and swallowed a scoop of coffee instead, the bitterness for this taste, that was Colonel G putting his hands on me and putting mine on him. Later, I took down the sugar jar and ate a spoonful of sugar. That was for him calling me by my real name, for putting my photograph on his table, and for actually listening to me when I talk. So for me, I would choose this story to highlight. Oh, okay, it's because it's different. Surprisingly, I could relate to this. If I'm a woman and I read other short stories, it's similar to me, his demise, because I can straight away identify that he was being emotionally and physically abused. But the thing is, in the Chinese community, men and sons are considered luck, and their hierarchy is higher than daughters and sons. So actually, for him to experience domestic abuse is not really unheard of. Not say unheard of. It's not really said of. So for the author to portray this, it shows that men do experience domestic abuse, and unlike the female counterpart, it will be even more shameful and very hurtful for the men to be identified as a domestic abuse victim. So coming back to Cornell, he said that the original idea of hegemonic masculinity need not be the commonest pattern in the everyday lives of boys and men. Rather, the hegemony works in parts through the production of examples of masculinity, symbols that the authority despite the fact that most men and boys do not fully live up to men. So this means it's like the part where he mentioned he tried to help, but he was called useless because he could not get the covers on the can quick enough. He was slower than the female girls, those who are working. And then this character from this short story perhaps wasn't considered as his man since his early childhood, because his worth and value of being a boy was actually degraded and his emotional need was shut off. So to be credited as a man, what an individual male must do, in other words, is to put on a convincing manhood act. By Schwalbe, 2005. Although he tried to help, but in the end he failed, and he, instead of progressing better, he got worse. And so, in other words, if he was more capable in helping his parents, or as a cliche story that he broke free from this negative cycle of domestic abuse, and if in the end the author instead wrote him that he was able to triumph against his parents, then he will be reconsidered as a man again, which then comes back to the notion that for young males is that emotional display must be regulated, lest it undermine a manhood act. So all in all, in conclusion, is that I started this as Shirley Call's representation, her author-defined reality of men, is rather different from the books that I have read. Not to say that I have read a lot, but yeah. So additionally, by Corrigan, E.L., debunked that sex role theory for its blindness to power, show how masculinity was about power relations among men and not only between women and men. And they also treated masculinity not as a trait, but as a form of collective male practice that has its effect, the subordination of women, but also formulated the concept of hegemonic and subordination between men. So, in other words, the subjugation of men in a man's world. So, through these three particular short stories in the book, the author introduces to the readers the male characters in a familiar way of the strong, dominant man. But then she slowly shifts the focus, and the definition of man, perhaps the unspoken, the taboo issues of men, is showcased through the other side of the coin, through the characters rather subtly. But it's not to be mistaken that her message on the issues are not being highlighted. They are quite frank and direct, as you can see through the excerpt that I've underlined and bold. She does write it as though the issue surrounding men has been overly sugar-coated by the common understanding of masculinity, and the story of the flow did not beat around the bush as how usually gender issues are discussed. She really just shows it all, and it's ultimately for the readers to take it or leave it. So again, from Sherhock and Schwalbe, 2009, literature review, learning to signify a masculinity self entails learning how to adjust to audience and situations, and learning how one's other identities bear on the acceptability of a performance. And also importantly, the process of learning how to signify a masculinity self in situation appropriate ways continues throughout their lives. All men who act simply claim to the membership in the privileged gender group. So I'd like to just add on, it's like lastly, not just in terms of gender issues on how women, but towards the men. It's highlighted that the problems faced by men are perhaps more easily and intended by people to sweep it under the carpet. And since expressing emotion excludes the general, most of the men from the male club, so they just, struck on and move on. And I presume this would be the many causes of gender issues that are linked to women. The most prominent one would be domestic or any kind of relationship abuse. So as how going back to in Malaysian literature and how Shirley Call as a Malaysian female author states that most gender studies are focused on women, but as how this author, she sheds light on the male counterpart, gender issues can be unreal and progress to be looked on. So the readers can also identify the struggles of how these male characters strive to become a man in their own roles, and that their actions more often than not comes with regrets, urges, and a yearning. So, but on all, I would like to mention that these stories, the gap perhaps did not include all the races in Malaysia, because it looks on the Chinese and Malay race. But based on the text and literature review, it seems that men issues are rather similar as to how the issues on women are generalized, as well as in the Malaysian literature context, gender issues still have many paths to be explored. And so these are the references that I got, and thank you. And just how do I stop share? Stop presenting. And yes, to my course-mates, and if you feel that like maybe your brother or your father-in-law or your male friends do experience it, just let me know if you, yeah. Thank you, Doctor. I'm done. Sorry, Doctor, I muted.
Are you done with the presentation then, Jennifer?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
I feel like your discussion is very strong. Your what you feel you are able to draw out of these stories is very strong, very prominent. The conclusions that you are able to draw. However, the analysis and the choice of excerpt do not seem to kind of match up, or do not seem to support that discussion, that level of discussion. You said something very prominent towards the middle when you said, and I quote, emotional displays must be regulated. What does that mean?
This was from the literature review. I just didn't explain properly. It means that in the article it says that to be a man you need to regulate, you need to hold on to your emotions. So to be a man means that you need to be not to say stoic, but you need to be like you can handle emotions well. So like all these characters, they do that, but at the same time they are crippling inside.
Give me an example. When you say all these characters do that, where in your analysis do you show that these characters regulate their emotions or don't express themselves well? That part is missing in your analysis. So when you say these statements, whatever the statements are about these stories, make sure you tie it immediately with actual excerpt and analyze it. Don't separate your analysis in one section and your discussion in another section, because the coherence between the sections will be missing.
Okay.
That's one thing that's glaringly obvious here.
Okay.
And when I was listening to you with identifying the excerpts, and you were very careful. You looked at the keywords and the phrases. What appears more prominent to me is that the male characters appear to have the autonomy to make certain decisions for themselves. You know, when we talked about gender and I looked at some female representation of female characters in Malaysian literature in English, you notice how the female characters are either objectified or muted or silenced.
Yes.
They're not given that kind of prominence. Whereas your stories, Shirley's representation of men in her stories appear to give prominence, you know, to kind of elevate the position of men.
Okay.
They have voice, they have representation. There was one excerpt when I managed to write down the actual excerpt. I would be less of a man, more of a father, husband, or friend. Less of a man according to my father, if I did what my father asked me to do, but more of a father, a husband, and a friend if I did what I wanted to do. So the male characters, even though they are being closely scrutinized by the patriarch in the society, by their father, they seem to have a voice. Even the boy who was physically abused, you know, he has a voice. He knows he wants to take the sugar and put it in his mouth. He knows he feels happy when he sees his picture on the colonel's table. He still has a voice. He's still not muted, is he? Even though he is abused, he still has a voice. Whereas with female characters, if they're abused, they are abused. They're silenced. They're muted. They have no contribution to the story except to be objectified.
That's true.
So I want you to kind of probe when you're looking at this two prominent things. Number one, make sure the discussion is tied with the analysis. Don't separate it, you know, with some research, English language study research, they will have the data in one section and the discussion in another section. For literature, it's highly recommended to put it together. That means in the analysis section, you have excerpts plus discussion, and then you conclude in the end.
Okay.
That will be a lot easier for you, coherent wise. Yeah, another thing that you can also do, you know, when you're looking at the excerpts, ask yourself, how are they connected? And how are they connected beyond what you said at the beginning, which is you want to look at how men are portrayed by Shirley Cao. Okay, fine. You did do that, how men are portrayed. But tell me how you feel Shirley Cao is able to, was she able to break away from stereotypical depiction of men? Was she challenging certain representation of men in Asian societies? What do you feel she did in the end?
I do think she actually did challenge the stereotype of how Asian men is, particularly in the Asian society, because although Dr. you said that they have autonomy to choose whatever they do, but that just feels like a facade. Like it feels like they have the autonomy, but actually they don't. So I think that was portrayed. But the point of how I think Shirley was trying to highlight the issues of men is just that men and women, I presume, that in gender studies are actually together. So for us to look at female studies, it's best that we also look at the male counterpart. And so to look at why are the males like this and how they affect the women actually, because of how I think her point of saying that men, there's also like hierarchy in men, like who's the alpha and who's like the omega. And because the alpha are so predominant, and they do not give voices at all to the women, and even how it's like the lower ranking men who acted out differently do so for the women, it doesn't help because they are not solving anything, I guess. So in terms of the issues that she's trying to highlight, it's also about because actually the last story of the man, he was in domestic abuse, but at the same time, since young, sniffing the glue, and he was actually deemed as useless really since from the start after his grandmother passed away. So for a man, like funnily or ironically, for him to be degraded as not being useful is very weird for a Chinese family. So yeah, I think she did that.
You see, that those are the aspects of the context that's missing in your analysis. The stories were read in a kind of a vacuum. You didn't provide us with that aspect of the context, which would have helped your analysis better. Because coming from an outsider's perspective, looking at Shirley's representation, the context that culture and the community would have helped, would have provided if you had that knowledge, was missing. You know,
Okay.
you went from introducing what you're going to do straight into the text. There was a bit of a gap between what's the context that these stories are created. Maybe talk about communal society, maybe talk about Asian society, maybe talk about within patriarchal society.
Okay.
You're absolutely right. It sounds as if the men have autonomy, but they still have to function within the autonomy of the culture.
Okay.
You know, so I agree with you, but the element of the context of the culture needed to have been embedded. However, you had three stories, but one of the stories is not a Chinese character. You know, so the other two were the cultural specification mentioned? Was there anywhere mentioning that this is a Chinese community or
the first story actually didn't, but as how you read his story, Chinese tea and stuff like that, it was really he wasn't even given a name.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's almost like this could be any man.
Yeah, any man
So
in a
kind
Chinese
of
society.
reality of it.
Yeah.
That's another aspect that's missing also.
Okay.
That when we look at gender, it has to be within a kind of a framework that allows the discussion to be more in-depth, right?
Okay.
If we do it in a vacuum, can an Iraqi man and a Malaysian Indian man or a Malaysian Chinese man or a Malaysian Malay man, can they see eye to eye on these issues that you discuss? Or will there be some kind of differences between them? I think that's the thing that we need to kind of create as a form of a structure in your analysis to make the conclusion. If you look at your discussion, all the things that you are saying, they are key, they are important, but they needed to have been grounded in some kind of contextualized ideas about society, about culture, before the analysis makes sense.
Okay, I see.
Okay, so but good effort, well done. Again, you know, you've taken up a writer that we didn't study, but you've made it into your own discussion. So well done. Huda?
Yes, doctor.
Can you share screen or do you want me to share the one that you emailed me?
No, I can't, doctor. Thank you, because I have power.
Go ahead.
Is anything?
Not yet.
Okay. Very good.
Shall I share the one that you sent me?
Okay, okay, doctor. I'll try. This is the last
Okay.
time.
Okay.
So, anything? Nothing, Papa?
Not yet. No.
Not yet.
You can click on share screen, Huda.
Yes, I am.
It is in the middle of the screen. And then go to your slide at the bottom of your screen. Open your slide.
Share screen, and then you have to identify the desktop.
I don't know what's wrong, doctor. I am such a
It's okay.
loser in technology.
No, don't say
Don't
things
say
like
that.
that.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
Okay, doctor, please, can you share my slides?
Just a second. No, I wasn't laughing at you. I was laughing at my cat trying to catch the bird outside the window.
Oh my God.
She was asleep in front of me, and then she woke up when she saw the cat, and then she's like, eyeing the cat. So yeah.
So cute.
Does it have a name, Victor? Does it have a name?
Nina. My cat's name. My cat's name is Nina.
Nina?
Mm-hmm. She was sleeping in front of me, stretched out, with her belly pointed out. And then the minute she saw the bird outside the window, she just immediately got up. Okay. All right, here we go. Huda is looking at, okay, Huda, this is yours. Okay. Can you see it?
No.
Yes.
No?
I can see it though.
For me, no, but for you, yeah, I think Jenny can see.
Yeah, I can see
Ali,
it.
can you see the screen?
Ali?
Can you see
Yes, Victor, I also can see, yes.
Okay.
What's wrong with you, Huda?
I don't know.
Then how are you going to?
I'll read
Do
it
you
from
have-
my computer, doctor. I have my,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay,
My-
you tell me when you want me to move to the next slide. Right now, this is the title slide.
All right. So, diaspora communities in Malaysia, a rich literature of a life of adjustment and coping strategies in KS Maniam's in far country. So we will go to the second one, if you don't mind.
Done. Yeah.
The introduction will be one of the biggest effect of the colonial era on today's society, specifically the countries that were colonized in the past, is immigration. Whether the immigrant were exiled abroad as indentured laborers or choose to migrate, the effects can be similar. Rushdie 2002 states that diaspora can create problems such as trauma, rootlessness, or a quest for identity. These psychological problems can be seen in many novels of diasporic writers. As these elements can cause stress and be a problem to individuals, these individuals can use coping strategies to cope with the stressor. Finchel argues that in carrying out a work or learning or work of adjustment, characters make a conscious effort to deal with the reality. And go to third slides.
Yes.
K.S. Maniam is a prominent writer from the diasporic Andean communities, wrote extensively about diasporic communities and their struggles. Raihana and others, 2011, state that each central character's conflict lies in his or her ability or disability to balance accepting ethnocultural recognition on the one hand, and contesting the reification that the Indian ethnic group subject him or her to on the other hand. In this presentation, I will discuss the cupping strategy used by diasporic characters in KS Maniams in a far country. I am also going to prove that the characters discussed do not succeed in cupping with their stressor and their society, leaving them feeling alienated. And fourth slide, the conceptual framework is the diaspora. Diaspora is Greek for dispersion or scatter. Historically, there was the diaspora of the Jews. After the Babylonian exile, in more recent time, there was the diaspora of Europeans, for instance, the Irish, and the diaspora of Arab, for instance, the Yemenis, Chinese, and Indian. This is said by Bernard. As for Rushdie, gives elements that characterize the diasporic individual. Being a diasporic individual causes conflict within the diasporic person and their community. These individuals show specific issues related to their identities and might find problems in adapting to the society or feeling that they fit in, as Rushdie describes diasporic literature as having a strong idea of trauma, dislocation, unending longing, existential rootlessness, and the quest for identity. This is Rushdie 2002. The fifth slides will be, there are so many ways of adapting and coping with the new country, but I use Volkmann and Lazarus 1980. So we have the primary appraisal. It is the process of perceiving a threat to oneself. The threat in the novel is the characters feeling their identity being lost or being attacked by a community with a different identity. That means they are confused and they feel lost. The second appraisal, the process of bringing to mind a potential response to the threat. This is seen in the novel in the characters' thoughts and reflection of what they could do and how they can interfere with the threat that is inevitable. The third one will be the cupping. The cupping means the process of executing that response. In the novel, different characters use different strategies. Next, we have to look at the different type of cupping strategies. Now, slide 6. Cupping strategies as for Carver and others, 1989. Active cupping, there are two kinds of cupping. The active cupping, it means the process of taking active step to try to remove the circumvent the stressor of the ameliorate its effect. Active cupping includes initiating direct action, increasing one's efforts, and trying to execute a cupping attempt in a stepwise fashion. It means that he wants to improve this this cupping by making practical steps to cup in the country. So the active cupping will be first planning, thinking how to cup. 2, the suppression of competing activities. It means that putting other activities or distraction aside. means that he confused on cupping and leave all the feeling or the all other things aside. 3, restrain cupping, waiting until an appropriate opportunity to act presents itself. It means that he will be in time taking the cupping, taking the step to the cupping strategy. 4, seeking social support for instrumental reasons in seeking advice, assistance or information, getting moral support, sympathy or understanding. And these are the type of cupping strategy, and this type involves of techniques of the cupping. Now 7, there are another one, the opposite of cupping strategy. It will be the dysfunctional cupping. It means dysfunctional cupping contains cupping strategies that are not useful in cupping and may result in failure to cup. These usually happen when the person thinks that they will have no outcome in trying to cup actively. So we have the focusing on and venting of emotions, the tendency to focus on whatever distress or upset one is expressing and ventilate those feelings just to release his feelings. Second, we have behavior disengagement, reducing one's effort to deal with the stressor, even giving up the attempt to attain cup can also be seen as helplessness. It means he never tried to cup with the country. Mental disengagement happens when conditions prevent behavioral disengagement occurs via a wide variety of activities that serve to distract the person from thinking about the stressor. And the fourth, the denial, a response that sometimes emerge in primary appraisal. Some argue that denial only creates more problems. Now 8. One might ask why we are studying cupping strategy and what is the purpose and the benefit behind it. So I will say we use cupping strategies to play a psychoanalytic approach to the struggle of the diasporic people and the way they solve their conflicts with the society. It is useful to study the cupping strategies to compare and potentially establish pattern between diaspora characters from other novels, other works, or other countries. As for the case of Malaysia, diasporic literature is a big interest as there is a big population of Indian and Chinese diaspora. We also would like to know how the character cope with the conflict created by the diaspora in literature as it can affect the reality of these communities. Now slide 9. We have I grouped the characters according to their cupping strategy. I will have Rajan and Vasente. As for Rajan, the behavioral and mental disengagement. He suffered from both the behavioral and mental. As for Vasente, just mental disengagement. These characters were not welcome to the community. They were always seen as foreigners and even seen as intruders who brought an outside culture to Malaysia and tainted it These characters were told to embrace the Malaysian culture and not show any aspects of their home countries. This triggers the characters to question their identities, asking questions such as where they belong, how they can handle the culture of the country they were raised in, and how they can balance the different identities they have to be at home, with the friends, at work, and with local Malays. Now 10, if you don't mind, Doctor. So in this research, what are the main object of it? First one is identify the stressor for each character, to identify the coping strategy they use. 3, point out the nature of the coping strategies. Is it active or dysfunctional? Now 11, if you don't mind. As for Rajan, he locks himself in his room, experienced an identity crisis, recalls memory of his drinking father, focuses on traumatic experiences, decides to be free from a culture or identity. As for Thasante, she tries her best to be the best daughter and best wife. She uses faces to show emotions that people accept her to feel at certain times. And 3, experience detachment from herself and identity crisis. Now 12. As for Rajan, he suffered from mental disengagement. It will be seen as the stressor of Rajan. He lived his life seeing his father getting drunk and cursing Malaysia. As an adult, he hated Malaysia too. He engages in memories of his father, who apparently suffered from the same identity crisis, remembering his father always cursed Malaysia and wanted to go back to India, even though it was not a great place, made him seek to dissociate from the community. 13. Rajan uses disengagement and escape. He locks himself in a room and cuts his communication with his family and outside world. This act of disengagement makes him feel safe from the world that he feels is trying to take away his personality and identity. As in this excerpt, he used to say, "Fortunately for me, I don't have a history, no past, no desire to give a value to life." This is in page 115. Dissociation can be seen in the word fortunately. Rajan feels safe that he can easily cut off his ties. Since he has no history and no culture, he decided to live in a neutral space with no identity and no belonging. 14. We said before that Rajan have suffered from mental and behavioral disengagement. It will be shown Rajan and other diaspora characters use their own language to speak to each other. Though we all speak one language, the national language, we also use our parents' tongue. Sometimes when different communities meet in a common function, so we somehow take exception to the common language and lapse into our mother tongues, as in page 146. Language can be seen as another form of escape and dissociation used by the diaspora community through different language. They both reject the national language of the country they live in and separate themselves by speaking so that the host community does not understand them. This makes them feel safe, suggesting that it is in fact a form of reaction to the stress and being coping strategy. I can say it could be as a weapon to react upon the against the country that neglect them. As for 15, the mental disengagement for Fazanthi, the stressor, the cause of her stress as a child, Fazanthi's parents never include her in any decision, even those that were about her. They designed and planned even her ambitions. She never knew why they sent her to school, and at one point stopped her from going to school without her knowing the reason. They had woven the garland of marriage around her neck even before she could work out for herself what she wanted to be. Vasanthe also went through physical violence in her young age. Her father used his anger, believing it to be a tool to raise the children, and beat up his kids to teach them, or even for no reason. He beats us often, sometimes for no reasons at all. This is in page 194. The 16th, she felt like an imposter and had to detach from herself and pretend to feel emotion to keep the people around her happy. I didn't know who I was. There was always this feeling that I lived inside the skin of someone I didn't know. My own self was somewhere far away. And she admits to her mental disengagement when she says, after some times I gave up wondering who I was. She stopped taking active steps to find herself and make peace with her new environment and society. Even Rajan describes her the frightening thing about all this was that she had submitted too easily. This is in page 180, which shows that her mind gave up any kind of fight or attempt to cope. Slide 17, the conclusion will be the diaspora characters in a far country show self-interrogation in the novel. Their community reject them, which triggers stress and a reaction. The characters react in a maladaptive range of coping strategies. They avoid their society since it is the source of the problem. The characters show disengagement with their community through physically locking themselves in their homes or running away from all the stressors. Some characters, such as Rajan, also use their language, which reminds them of their home country and makes them feel safe and isolated. Rajan ends up deciding to live with no identity, while Vasanthi gives up fighting and accepts anything thrown at her. All characters exhibit a bad coping strategy where they fail to adapt to their community and feel a temporary relief from the stress caused by Being a diasporic individual, all characters are unable to cope with their stressor in the novel. And these are my references. Thank you for listening.
Okay. All right. Well done, Huda.
Thank you, Dr.
I think you have improved in your presentation skills compared to last semester. You know, every presentation seems to get stronger because you have a more clear focus and scope. I like how you started by looking at the context, colonialism, migrant community, this idea of rootlessness, and then you move into the text. From the context, you move into the text, looking at K.S. Maniam as an example of a diasporic writer. Then you moved into the framework, diaspora and the coping strategy. And then you ask the question, what's the purpose? You know, what's the purpose of looking at the coping strategy in this novel? And the answer you said was looking at how diasporic community copes, what kind of patterns that emerge. And then you went into the analysis, and your analysis, you focus only on Vasanti and Rajan.
Yes,
even though there are many characters in the novel, you only focus on those two characters, and your analysis was structured, was focused, was guided by the methodology that you developed in the framework. So the analysis, everything, it's very good, very focused. Now the conclusion, one of the statements that you made was that, and I quote, the community rejects them. Which community rejected Rajan and Vasanti?
The host country, the host country, Malaysia.
The society, not community.
Yeah.
Because when we use the word community, it tends to be focused on a particular community, the Malay, the Chinese, the Indian, the Iraqi, the Arabs. When we talk about society, you talk about the nation as a whole, Malaysian society. But you see, the thing is, your analysis was focusing more on the way they were coping, or the way that the lack of coping that they have. But your conclusion was talking about the community and what the community did or did not do, the society, and what the society did and did not do. I feel there's a mismatch between your analysis, what you're trying to achieve, and the conclusion. So I would consider re-looking at the conclusion and focusing more on, because when you said what's the purpose of doing this, and the purpose was to look for patterns that emerge, right? So your conclusion should reiterate that why. Your conclusion should reiterate what kind of pattern do you see emerging from K.S. Maniam's In a Far Country, his second novel, and how does this pattern that emerged from this novel echoes other diasporic novels, other diasporic narratives, maybe Chinese diasporic, Indian diasporic, any other diasporic novels. So go back to your why and answer that in your conclusion. Don't go too far away from it. Don't talk about the other communities and whether they reject or accept Rajan and Vasanti, right? Focus more on the patterns that emerge through the discussion of coping strategy. So if you do that, this is a very solid seminar. Okay?
Okay, Doctor.
Right. So well done. I'm very happy. I'm very happy with the work.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any questions?
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay.
Jennifer?
So far, okay, Doctor.
Ali?
Thank you, Doctor. From me, I just want your notes in order to make
Yes.
our adjustments about our assignment today.
I have
Thank
them
you.
all here. I will type them up and send it to you, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Dita.
Before I forget, I would like to draw your attention to the assignments as well as the e-task that I have already put on UKM Folio on our course site. You have 5 e-tasks and 3 assignments that will make up your entire course. So today you have done your seminar. At least 3 of you have. We will wait for Alice to feel better and then we will have her session. You have done your video essay. You have uploaded it. You have 5 e-tasks. You've got the first e-task here. The second one about Malaysia and its author.
Are you sharing screen?
Oh, good Lord. I'm talking to myself. Yes, I'm sharing screen, happily sharing screen, but I didn't realize you guys can't see it. Thanks.
It's okay, it's okay.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, anyway,
we can
so
see
this is our UKM Folio home page, the course page. So these are the tasks that you have, some of which you have done and some of which you still need to do. For the introductory topic, you've got e-task 1. And then you have e-task 4. What have you learned so far? I need you to answer that. There is e-task 2, and I think you've done that. E-task 3. Using any Malaysian literature in English, describe how Malaysian writer, poet nativize or domesticate the English language. Then e-task 5 is what I want to talk about today. Okay. E-task 5 is related to the topic emerging writers. The writers that we have discussed thus far, especially K.S. Maniam, are the first and second representative of the first and second generation writers who captures the essence of the canon, Malaysian literature in English, in its in its first 30-40 years, right? The struggles for identity, the issues of identity crisis, the struggles with finding a kind of sense of belonging, especially for the migrant community, looking at the history and how history is an important character in the stories that are being told about Malaysia by Malaysian writers. In the 21st century, writers have kind of evolved, in terms of the kind of concerns that they represent or they capture in their stories, and these writers range, from up-and-coming writers to highly successful writers of the 21st century, who are also prolific writers, who are also producing quite a lot of work, even though they are quote-unquote emerging. You would think emerging means they've just produced one work, but there are Malaysian writers in the 21st century who have produced quite a number of works, including Shirley that Jennifer talked about. She would fall within the emerging, but because she has produced quite a lot of work, we can't consider her emerging anymore, because she's created a reputation for herself. Now, for this topic, emerging writers, I have there's this article that identifies top 9 writers by Malaysian writers, up and coming Malaysian writers that warrants attention. You know, these are new writers that warrants attention. So some of these writings, The Weight of Our Sky, The Night Tiger, Though I Get Home, Lake Like a Mirror. I think those are the 4. Yeah, those are the 4. These I have already downloaded them for you. It's here in the reading list. So the novels are here. Some of them are novels, some of them are short stories. Okay, so you know, choose one of these and answer these e-tasks. Which emerging Malaysian writer do you like? That's a simple, you know, that's a simple e-task, right? It has to be emerging. That means you cannot use writers from the 20th century. You have to find a writer that is current, you know, the last 5 years. Okay, so I highly recommend looking at these novels or short story collections that I have identified for you. Okay, I've also sent you the same, I've also sent it to you on the WhatsApp. So try to download it. Let me know if you have trouble accessing it. Try to download these stories and kind of just go through it just to see which stories echoes your concern, your interest. Okay, and answer the e-task. Answer the e-task for the final e-task. So for next week, I'm actually giving you a reading week because with you know, with our situation, we don't have a reading week. You don't have exam week. So I'm going to take next week as a reading week. So you will not have class, but you need to do the e-task that I have assigned. Okay, so go through the 5, you know, works that I have posted on UKM Folio as well as on our WhatsApp. Maybe you will read one and you're like, no, I don't quite like this one. Or maybe you will read the first one, you think, yeah, this is exactly the kind of thing I like. So I would highly recommend that you read up about the stories before you read the story to get a sense of, is this something I'm interested in, right? And then when you have chosen it, read through it and do a short write-up, right? Maybe a paragraph or maybe a couple of PowerPoint slides to kind of explain what is it about that book that you like. Then answer e-task 5 by identifying that writer that you have chosen as the emerging Malaysian writer that you like. Okay, and then, oh, I forgot. And I would also like you to start thinking about your final project. I know you've just finished one assignment. I mean, I don't want to kind of like, you know, bombard you with assignment, but this is the final assignment. This is it. So within the emerging writers section, you may find that the writer that you choose for the e-task number 5 may also be the text that you choose for your final project. You can do that if you want, but if you've got your own choice for your final project, that's fine. But this is the question that I'm asking for your final project. It's a very open-ended question. I give you a statement. I give you a couple of statements. Malaysian literature in English has a significant place in the social cultural tapestry of the nation, along with historical and sociological literatures. In addition, author-defined social reality continues to inform how Malaysian writers represent the nation over 60 years. Discuss these statements with reference to any Malaysian literary work. It can be collection of short stories, it can be poems, it can be novels, plays, whatever. So I strongly recommend that you choose based on the e-task 5 so that there's a connection. E-task 5, you just describe generally which emerging Malaysian writer do you like. Final project, you do a full 20-page essay about the text that you have chosen. Okay, so next week I'm giving you time to do that, to read through the novels and short stories that I have sent you, identify one, as well as plan your final project. The week after that, next week is week 11. The week after that, I want to see your thoughts about your final project. Okay? Any questions?
So far, okay, Doctor.
Okay, Doctor.
So you
Okay,
know what you're supposed to do next week.
Yeah, read up.
What are
Okay,
you
Doctor.
supposed to do next week?
Read up on the short stories and just
we will choose
identifying.
one of these.
Choose, exactly. Choose from the list that I have given you, right? Because if you were in Malaysia, Ali and Huda, and also Alice, if all of you were in Malaysia, I will send you to the bookstore, to the local bookstore in one of the shopping complexes, where you can find any Malaysian novel, and you can just purchase based on, read through it. You get to kind of select yourself. And because you're not here, I'm kind of modifying this assignment slightly, So I'm sending you 5, and these are recent ones, the last maybe 2 years or 3 years, and some of them are very, very recent. Based on them, choose one for e-task 5, and also come up with your final project proposal, and then see me see me in 2 weeks' time. In January, and I want to see your ideas for your final project, and I will guide you each. I will give you each consultation to kind of guide you towards completing your final project, and just a kind of just to kind of clue you in that for your final project, it's like a journal paper. All right. Now, if you do a very good journal paper proposal for your final project, I will help you work with you as a co-writer, and we will send it out to a journal for publication consideration. But it's got to be, but I would rather you choose emerging writers, because not enough has been done on them. Whereas if you chose KS Maniam, Ali and Huda, if you chose today's presentation to develop that into a full journal paper, it's not as original, because a lot work has been done on KS Maniam, his entire canon, and as well as on In a Far Country, right? But you may use the framework that you have chosen for today's discussion to study these other novels if you want. That means you can use the same methodology, but you may identify a different novel or different text. Is that okay?
Yes, Doctor.
Okay, Doctor. All right.
Okay. All right. So no pressure for the publication. I'm not going to push you for that, but try to aim. This is something my lecturer at college told me after my A levels. He said, aim for the stars. That way, if you land on the moon, you are still high enough. Don't aim for something mediocre. Aim for something really high that challenges you, so that even if you don't get there, even if you fall slightly short of that, you still have achieved something significant for you at this stage in your life, So work hard to kind of try to challenge yourself and see how far that takes you. And if you show me a strong proposal, I will guide you from 2 weeks time. From that time you consult me, I will guide you and we will develop that into potential journal publication. All right. So so I won't see you next week, but please use the time to prepare for your final project, as well as to catch up on any of the e-tasks that you haven't completed. Try to use this time effectively so that by the end of semester, when you submit your final project, you're done with the course. You're done with all the other assignment. All right?
Okay,
Sorry, Doctor. But as for these, the emergent writers, they write on Diaspora as well.
You have to check. You have to see if any of them are discussing on that element. Yeah, you have to see.
Yeah. So we will choose the concept as well, Doctor.
Yes, yes.
What he is famous or what he is better in.
For sure. But you see, when you're reading a text, sometimes you may introduce a concept, or you may introduce a reading approach to the text based on what you see as relevant, not necessarily what the writer is known for, right? Okay, Maniam is known for his portrayal of the Indian community, yes. But you may also want to look at something else that others have not recognized him for, right? So likewise, these emerging writers, because they're emergent, not enough has been done on them. But you have read literature enough to know that when you see representation of men and women that seem biased, you may use gender as a lens, right? And if you see the context is more historical, then you may bring that lens as well in the reading of the novel. So in 2 weeks' time, when you talk to me about it, first of all, identify the text that you want to choose and identify generally the thesis statement. Always start with that. What is it that what's the purpose of what you want to do? Why do you want to analyze this text? And then we will have a kind of, each of you, I will give each of you about a 15-20 minute consultation slot that I will give you personalized supervision on how to develop your final project. That we will do it that way for the next, for the entire month of January until your project is due. So I will guide you that way, because I want you to kind of have a more tailor-made supervision so that you know what is required. But you need to start by giving me your thoughts about the text first, and then I will guide you and I'll make you suggestions what you could look at.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Any other questions?
So far, okay, Doctor.
So, thank you.
Okay. All right. So it was very good class. Thank you very much for your presence and your participation. Jennifer, Merry Christmas to you for tomorrow. Hopefully you have a good Christmas with your family, and Happy New Year to everyone, because I won't be seeing you until January. So may the coming year bring us more peace and more prosperity, as well as safety with our loved ones, inshallah.
Thank you, Doctor. Merry Christmas to you and Ali and Huda.
Thank
Happy
you,
New
Doctor.
Year.
Merry Christmas, Jenny.
Happy New Year for everyone.
Uncle.
Doctor.
Okay, stay safe, everybody. Anything, I'm only a WhatsApp away, so you drop me a message if you've got any concerns. But otherwise, I expect next week to be a reading week. So please read and explore your ideas and Google and get all the kind of preparation. So I will see you, inshallah, in 2 weeks' time.
Okay, Doctor.
Inshallah,
Stay
Doctor.
safe, everyone.
Right, take care.
Happy holidays.
Doctor.
Bye.
Bye bye, everyone. Bye bye, Doctor.
Bye-bye.